Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So we have a handball player in Australia who had hopes of coming to the Olympics to compete on the women's team. The only problem is this person is male. So he's not going to be able to travel from Australia to the US to compete. He's not even going to be able to get a visa due to the changes that Trump implemented in the midst of his executive order, where it was declared that there are only two genders here. There are only two sexes, male and female. And that if you want to compete in the women's division in the 2028 Olympics, you have to be female. Very, very simple. That shouldn't even take an executive order. But apparently it's necessary because countries from all over the world are going to be hosted here in the US. And unfortunately, the IOC left it up to the individual national governing bodies to determine whether men can compete in women's categories. And Australia, unfortunately, is allowing a huge male athlete, an absolutely huge guy, to compete against women. Now, when I saw these photos, immediately you have to question, is this AI? Is this a joke? Because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I can't believe this person has been allowed to compete in the women's category, has been allowed to compete against women for over 8 years now. No wonder he thinks he can come to the Olympics and compete in the women's category, because in his country it has been allowed for a prolonged period of time. Well, no more. Not at Olympic level. You cannot come here and compete on a women's team and go up against female athletes. We don't want to see these images here in LA 2028. It reminds me of Paris and men getting into the ring with women and punching them in the face. That needs to be something that we don't see anymore, because it's only a matter of time. And I don't care that this person has been competing for 8 years. We don't know the details. We don't know what the female athletes have been through. We don't know what they've been up against when it comes to being in this situation where they're forced to compete against male athletes. The difference is as clear as day. J.K. Rowling weighed into this and had this to say about the male athlete complaining about mean old Trump not allowing him to come here to compete against women. And the Australian, this publication said, transgender athlete Hannah Mouncey says she fears her bid to become an Olympic handball representative will be dashed by year's end as anti-trans sentiments is weaponized across the world sport. Here's more. So thankfully, J.K. Rowling fixed that caption. Man fears he won't be allowed to cheat his way to the Olympics by playing against women. Man says anti-cheat sentiment is being weaponized against men like him who cheat. Read more here about why cheating man is sad and why the women he might injure just don't matter. This is indisputable. This person should not be competing in the female category. And if that's anti-trans, then I don't know what to tell you. I call it pro-safety, pro-fair and safe sports for women. That's what I call it. But apparently it's anti-trans to not allow cheating at the Olympics like we saw in Paris. Oh, women can be over 6 feet. Women can be of different sizes as well. Women can be big. This isn't a woman though. This is a man. Huge. A huge fella being allowed to compete against women who are clearly much smaller than him. This is an absolute disgrace, an absolute travesty that this has been allowed in the first place. It shouldn't take the Olympics to draw attention to this. You're not allowed to compete in the women's category because you're not a woman, and you shouldn't be competing in the wrong category, regardless of how you identify. I can identify as an Olympic champion in skiing. Even if this person was 4 feet tall, the fact that he's male should disqualify him immediately from any women's category. It's very simple. And yes, safety, as we see clearly, is a factor. He's been playing for 8 years, okay, but we don't know what these female athletes have been through. They're probably scared to speak out. They'll immediately be labelled bigots. And maybe some are all for it because they've been conditioned to be all for it, cheering on their own demise. Very, very sad. Well, not here in 2028, at least. And I hope by then Australia would have woken up. I really pray so. We need to see more lawsuits. Any woman who's had to be forced to compete against this person or be excluded should have grounds to sue and hold these sporting bodies accountable. According to theolympics.com, handball is a fast-paced indoor game where opposing teams try to score by throwing a ball into a football-style goal with posts and a crossbar, just for those of you who are not familiar with the sport. So a transgender athlete blocked from playing AFLW is now fearing a fresh ban that would stop him from representing Australia at the Los Angeles Olympics. In 2017, transgender footballer Hannah Mouncey was ruled ineligible for the AFL women's draft under the league's gender diversity policy, which assessed physical attributes such as strength, stamina, and physique. So that's a positive step in the right direction, that this person was actually banned from playing in women's football, because, I mean, this is just common sense. They can't even pretend. Trans women are women. And then they see this person. Really? The AFL said that Mouncey's inclusion could have an unreasonable physical advantage over other players, a decision that drew criticism from advocates who argued it was discriminatory. Wow. I think in this situation, with Australia being what it is, they said that in this situation we cannot deny the danger of allowing this person to play in football, in women's football, Australian football, which I believe is similar to American football. They do kick the ball, but they also tackle. They're just like, there's no denying it. And it should be the same with handball as well. It's different, but as far as I'm concerned, there's still a danger. Mouncey, who had previously represented Australia in men's handball, was later allowed to play in state-level women's competitions, including the VFLW. So Mouncey is now 35. Apparently handball is Mouncey's first love. And this person wanted to compete to represent Australia in 2028. Mouncey made a debut to women's national handball in 2018, competing at the Asian Women's Handball Championship in November. So obviously, the Australian women's handball team is hoping to qualify for 2028 and then gain automatic qualification for the Brisbane 2032 Games. However, Mouncey doesn't expect to be part of that, expecting rising anti-transgender athlete sentiment to slam the door shut. Is it anti-transgender sentiment when the AFLW decided that you pose a danger to female athletes due to your size? They didn't say, oh, women can be this size too. They just used their eyes and they could see the immediate danger. Having a male athlete competing on a women's team and going up against female athletes on opposing teams and training with female athletes, in his own team. We know it's a fact. When women compete against male athletes, they are more likely to be injured and more likely to be severely injured, as opposed to when competing against other female athletes. Categories exist for a reason, and identity shouldn't override that. So Mouncey said on the Sacked podcast, I expect to be banned by the end of the year, if I'm honest. It seems like that is where they are going at the moment. They are looking probably at a ban across the board. And not just for trans athletes, but intersex athletes. They will be forced to compete in the men's competition. Wow. So it's bigotry and, an injustice for male athletes to be forced to compete in the men's category. But it's not an injustice. And it's not misogyny to force women to compete against male athletes. You see where this is going? Male athletes who identify however they identify expect to be allowed to compete in the women's category. But how dare women expect to compete against other female athletes? How dare they be against male athletes crossing over into their category? God forbid the male athlete is forced to compete against other men. But it's okay forcing women to compete against men. But I am playing for Australia at the moment. I have played for the Australian women's team for 7 or 8 years now, and I have had no issues really at all, especially from overseas. I have been very open about it with the international federations. They have been fantastic. The Asian Handball Federation has no issues at all. I have competed in the Asian Championships and had no issues, and no other teams I have played against in those competitions have ever raised any concerns or issues at all. It is the exact opposite, and from countries where people might be more conservative. I have had such positive responses from some of the girls from Iran and Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. I wonder how women from those countries feel about you being in the locker room with them. I find it hard to believe that they'll be okay with that. That's the other issue that people love to gloss over. Men in women's locker rooms, all in the name of gender identity, because, they're on the women's team, so they should be allowed to change with the women, right? I wonder how these women from Iran would feel about a male athlete being in the showers with them. Not buying it at all. Just because some women may have chose to keep quiet and not speak out, or just gone along with it, I find it hard to believe that there have been no issues whatsoever. So this isn't the targeting of trans athletes and just banning them outright because, of bigotry and anti-trans sentiment. This is about safety. This is about fairness. This is about the consent of female athletes, all of which needs to come before feelings. I think it makes more sense to make the male athlete compete in the men's category than forcing women to compete against men. Sorry, I think it makes more sense. So nobody's excluding anybody from sports. You just need to compete in the correct category. That's all. There is no kind or type of woman who is male. The only type of woman that exists and has always existed is one who is female. And this person went on to dispute whether trans women have an advantage. This person is disputing whether men have an advantage over women in sports. I don't care how you gloss over it. The fight is hard. What makes me good as an athlete is also the thing that's probably my downfall outside of that. And that is, I can't walk away from a fight. There is pressure from a vocal minority, and we know FINA has banned trans people, as has the IAAF. There is huge pressure from the United States government as hosts of the next Olympics, and they are very anti-trans anyway. But I think the evidence in this is that if there was this problem of trans people having an unfair advantage, we would know it by now in the results. But we don't have it. There is obviously a fairness element to it. I am a big believer in that there has to be restrictions there. I have always advocated for that. But where the IOC is now, where you need 12 to 24 months of hormone treatment, is spot on, as someone who has been through it. Wow, and you know what that reminds me of? The same logic, or lack thereof, of transgender golfer Hailey Davison, who admitted that men do have an advantage over female athletes. But as long as there are guidelines, it's okay. As long as the male athlete's on hormone therapy, it's okay.
For a lot of people, because you were born a man, you clearly have an advantage. Do you accept that?
Honestly, I 100% agree. The men do have advantages. Say you get a trans person on hormones for a year, no surgery, nothing. But of course, for the most part, they're going to have an advantage.
People tend to often point to studies, and those studies show that it is an undisputed fact that men are physically stronger than women.
Oh yeah, agreed.
And therefore, people will look at you and say, surely and clearly, it is obvious to see that you would have the upper hand as you're playing against other women.
And I would agree if that were me, say 5 years ago. I mean, I've started transitioning 8.5 years ago, and as much as I, wish I could have played back then and wanted to play, 2 years after transitioning, it's clearly unfair. I think my whole philosophy behind all this is I don't believe trans people should be banned from sports, but I do believe there need to be guidelines in effect. Because, like I said, I mean, going back even 4 years ago, or even before I had surgery, I definitely had an advantage. I would 100% agree with that. But the difference is, now the years have gone on, I'm 3 years after surgery, and my physical capabilities now compared to back then are night and day.
I started hormone treatment after we got back from Qatar to try to qualify for the Rio Olympics, and in November 2015, I squatted 200 kilograms, benched 150 kilograms, cleaned 140 kilograms. Within 12 months, everything had dropped by 2/3 across the board. My quad had gone down to 60 or 65. My bench had dropped by 50. People don't understand that it is because you lose testosterone from the body, and that has an impact across the board. Wow. So this person is saying that he advocates for fairness and believes that there has to be restrictions, but at the same time is denying that men have a physical advantage over women. So he says we would know it by now if trans people did have an unfair advantage. We do know it because that's why we have categories in sports. We don't have to go through this over again. That's what I call gaslighting. And a man destroying his body with cross-sex hormones isn't a woman and will never be a woman. A man who lowers his performance against other men in comparison because he's on cross-sex hormones, again, will never be a woman, will never be female. The women's category is for females. No male athlete belongs in the women's category on hormones or no hormones. And we know that the experience of many female athletes is that they're up against men who aren't even on hormones. That's the reality that many female athletes face. Now, when it comes to the Olympics, these sporting bodies may have their requirements, but none of those requirements turns a man into a woman and makes it fair for that man to be competing in the women's category. So if you decide to take cross-sex hormones and lower your performance and destroy your body, that doesn't give you the right to compete in the women's category. You will still always have a male body, even if it's one that cannot perform at the same level because of medication. It's still a male body and has no business being in the women's category. So if you're an advocate for fairness, you need to take this L and you need to go over into the men's category and compete or decide what you want to do. Leave women out of it. So let me know what you think. Like, comment and subscribe. Take care of yourselves, and God willing, I will see you in the next video.